I've completed sheeting the opposite side of the HBC post, a little bit more to do on this side, and I'll be putting the shakes on. What I'm tickled pink about is I never used a level in this entire construction. And a saying that my father told me when I was a wee tyke, he said, no measurement supersedes a fair line. So I just used my eye, and I never anticipated it would turn out as good as it actually did. So yeah, I'm tickled pink with that. I've cheated a little bit, so I put down tar paper before I'm putting the shakes on. So I'm using, like, typically it would have been done where the shakes actually went across the purlins in cabin construction. If they didn't have cedar, they'd use clear oak, which makes a pretty good shake but won't last as long as cedar. And the reason I'm putting the cross members across, and that's where my cheating comes in, is that in order for a cedar shake roof to last, it has to be able to dry out underneath. So these give an air space and allows for the amount of overlap I want on each shake, and it'll get air underneath and the shakes will dry out and the roof should last, well, a lot longer than me. So I have been making pretty good progress with the Hudson Bay post. I've got one side of the roof just about done. Yeah, pretty soon I'll be stocking it. But I'm up on the roof and I can't get this song out of my head, and I'm singing Loch Lomond. And most of you will know at least the chorus, where you take the high road and I'll take the low road, that familiar tune from the Scottish Highlands. And it was written by a woman whose lover had gone off to fight in the Jacobite rebellion of 1745. So, and that makes sense. I mean, we visualize the kilts and the broadswords and the charge, but we don't associate that, or at least I didn't associate that much with the American Revolution. I'm going to tell a wee bit of history today about the Battle of Moore's Creek, or some would call it Widow Moore's Creek, which involves probably or arguably the last Highland broadsword charge in military history. So I'm going to find a place to sit down and I'll tell you a wee bit of history. So this battle is going to take place in North Carolina, and at the time the royal governor for the state of North Carolina was a fellow by the name of Josiah Martin, and he wasn't very popular. Obviously a patriot, he's appointed by the king, but the legislature had fallen out of favor. And we're talking the hotbed of the early start of the American Revolution. So when word gets down to the Carolinas that the Lexington and Concord fight has taken place, that really sets the fire under both the patriots and the loyalists. And surprisingly enough, there's a lot of immigrants from Scotland from the previous decade prior to this battle taking place that had actually called North Carolina home and remained loyal to the king. Hard to imagine after the Jacobite rebellion, but indeed they were. So now we're going to see an attempt by the British to galvanize that loyalty and form a Highland regiment, and that gets into the heart of this story. So Martin, he's not very popular, so he has to skip town, and he literally does, and he makes his way to Fort Johnston. Now, it's not very long after that the colonial militia are going to take that fort, and that's going to force Martin out onto the HMS Cruiser, a warship that's offshore. And for the duration of the American Revolution, or for a number of years, I should say, he's going to try to govern from that ship. I mean, he's governing from offshore, literally. But he's pretty confident that he's going to be able to raise 10,000 loyalists. Most of them, or a lot of them, are going to be these Highlanders. And they do love a good fight, so he's pretty confident that that's going to happen. So now enter the scene the Brigadier General Donald MacDonald. And he's seen action at Bunker Hill already, and he's going to be sent to the Carolinas to attempt to muster in these Highlanders into this newly formed ragtag army, if you would. And the idea is that they're going to make a march to the Atlantic Ocean, where they're going to rendezvous with Cornwallis, who is en route, General Clinton's en route, General Peter Parker is en route, and they're going to be able to take back basically the Carolinas from the Patriot cause. So rather than have the 10,000 that Martin was bragging about, they end up with about 1,600 men organized under MacDonald. Now the Patriots get wind of this, and they know they're going to make this march to the sea. So they're trying to get in a position where they can have them on a frontal basis, but sneak around the back. Well, that doesn't work, but they kind of pinch them along till they get to Moore's Bridge, which is the only place that these 1,600 men can cross on their march to the ocean. So we're talking a low, swampy area. Water's between 5 and 15 feet deep in this creek. The bottom's extremely muddy. It's full of debris, and the only place is this bridge. So what the Patriots have done is, on the night before the battle, which is going to take place on February the 26th, on the 25th, they're actually camped on the west side of this bridge. They realize that that's probably not tenable. Part of their force is on the east side, and they've done some earthwork, so they're entrenched. So in the night, they make their way across the bridge and fortify with the other group of Patriots. But in doing so, they pull up all the planking off this bridge, and then they grease the 2 remaining sleeper beams that hold the planks, and they grease them down with bear fat and soap and other stuff. So when the battle begins, and I'm visualizing these Scottish Highlanders with their broadswords drawn, probably a lot of them in kilts, with their clan tartan on, charging across this grease sleepers on this bridge. Reportedly, they actually used their broadswords to drive it into the beams so that they would have footing to take it out and stab it in and make a few more steps to get across the bridge. Well, even though they outnumber the Patriots, have roughly 1,000 men, the Highlanders have approximately 1,600, but they're confronted with people who are entrenched. And I've talked about the advantage of being entrenched numerous times in talking about previous and other wars. So they basically annihilate them. Those that aren't killed outright by musketry, some fall in the river and drown because of all their heavy accoutrements. And I'm going, I don't know what a broadsword was. Actually, I do. I had a broadsword in my hand once, and they are heavy. But you put all the other accoutrements, their muskets, their kilts, and they've fallen into 12, 15 feet of muddy water, and many of them drown. But basically it's a rout, and this whole army is going to break down, and they're going to retreat in mayhem. There are a couple of other interesting things to note in this battle. So on the morning of February the 27th, MacDonald is going to order his troops to start marching towards the bridge. He has underneath him a Lieutenant Colonel Donald MacLeod. Now he's young, he's keen, he thinks this is going to be the opportune time to take this bridge, thinking that the Patriots are camped on the west side. MacDonald, a little bit older, a little bit wiser, obviously in this case he's ill health, he doesn't think it's a good idea, but succumbs to the plan. So in the night they get lost, I mean abysmally lost in the swamps and the bayous. They don't make their way to the bridge till dawn, and one loyalist, and again another fellow by the name of MacLeod, I think, sees some people on the other side. Now he's thinking, okay, some of our guys have gotten here during the night, beat us to it, and they're on the other side of the river already, because all they find on the west side bank is trenches and fires and coals and no Patriots. So he hails to the other side. He goes, are you friend or foe? And the fellow on the other side says, friend to who? And he goes, friend to the king. And they scurry into their earthworks, and they realize, okay, the Patriots are on the other side, they're entrenched, but the battle goes on anyway, which comes to the grease sleepers of the beams in an abysmal failure for the upstart Highlanders of North Carolina. It's not going to be until May of that year that the naval part of the expedition is going to arrive on the coast. And that's not going to go a whole lot better for them either. So Sir Peter Parker attempts to do both a naval and land attack of Fort Moultrie on Sullivan Island, and the Patriots are able to repel that battle as well. So with the loss of the Highland Army, hopefully to join and bring a whole lot more loyalists into the fold has failed. Their first attempt to take a major fort has failed. Now sympathies towards loyalists drop off dramatically in the Carolinas. And yeah, I see this last, but in my mind, I have to go back to starting off this with this song stuck in my head about the Highlanders and the Jacobites. Literally, or arguably, I better say, the last Highland broadsword charge in military history. But before I finish up, a friend of mine, a recently new friend, although I met him last year, we've become historic research sharers, for lack of a better word. Lives in North Carolina. His name's Luther Jones. Read a poem for me in this show we did on Martin Station, but he gifted me a jacket I want to show you over here. And it's pretty interesting because we know that they didn't have like a universal uniform, but I found a couple of locations where they talk about them wearing short wool coats. And if you think about it, they were Scottish after all, and they wore kilts. So the trend or fashion at the time was sort of above the knee, that sort of area, maybe a little higher for Rev War period. But they wore the short coats because they wore kilts. And they weren't going to hide those beautiful clan tartans. It was one thing. So this is not documented. It's based on some research, loosely based on some research, but it's got the RP button with the king's crown on it. On the sleeves, it's got the same button pattern. It has one lapel, which would have been for the lanyard that would have held the scabbard that would have held the broadsword. On the other side, you'll notice there's no lapel. That's because they were pipers, so they would have had the pipes. And I don't know, I couldn't find any reference to them charging this bridge with the pipes playing in the backdrop, but somehow I imagine there was a set or two of pipes that were sounding off in the air for the charge.